Nadia, thank you so much for coming in. Like I said when we started the show, people are looking for answers, and right now they don't know where to look. Is it Business South Africa? Is it government? Is it the presidency? Where should we be looking for answers?
Yeah, look, I mean, so it is at crisis proportions, isn't it? So, look, I mean, I think it's a confluence of all those factors. I think government has to create a conducive environment that stimulates some level of confidence. And from there, then, you know, they needed to hand over the proverbial baton onto business, who then need to create the jobs given an environment which stimulates confidence, that's friendly towards investment, that promotes investment, and investment will result in job creation. I mean, if we break down some of the numbers, gross fixed capital formation in South Africa just a decade ago, or just over a decade ago at its peak, was well above 23% of GDP. If we look at that number today, that's well below 18% of GDP. So companies are not investing in long-term fixed investments and assets, probably being led by a decline in the state-owned entities because they don't have the money to invest, although the private sector hasn't been far behind. If we look at manufacturing as a share of GDP, that number was well above 20% in 1994. That number is now below 10%. You know, the manufacturing base in South Africa has been absolutely decimated. And there's a number of theories as to why that's the case. You know, real estate and finance has been a massively growing sector within the economy, and one wonders if that's come at the expense of manufacturing. But every single industrial economic success story of the last century has been driven by industrializing the economy. Now South Africa has gone in the reverse over the course of the last 25 years. So you ask where to look for the answers. Ultimately, business needs, or rather government needs to create the environment that's conducive to stimulating confidence, both from consumers as well as from business. And then businesses need to, with that environment of increased confidence, then need to actually invest and create the jobs. You know, the responsibility doesn't solely lie at government's feet. Let's not forget that JSE-listed companies have been investing offshore at a prolific rate, and some of those investment decisions have been horrendous. You know, if you, just off the top of my head, there's Woolworths, there's Famous Brands, there's Steinhoff, which we all know about now. You know, those are all businesses that have fundamentally, or there's Old Mutual, you know, who basically had to come back and relist in South Africa. Those are all businesses which have gone offshore and that have been terrible allocators of capital outside of South Africa, which one has destroyed value for South African shareholders, and two has prevented that investment from occurring in South Africa. Now, those corporates would argue that the environment in South Africa was not conducive to stimulate investment here, you know, and some of those points are valid. So government create the environment that's conducive for investments and create policy certainty, and businesses then need to pick up the baton and actually invest, which is the only way to create jobs over the long term.
To a certain extent, it sounds almost like a perfect storm, and not to make it that, and that's not a good thing. We saw the president soon after he took the highest office of the land a couple of years ago, started on these road shows and the job summit and all of these investment summits that he had. But we heard from Labour this morning, Becky and Charlie, I think this morning, was saying we're tired of all these promises that we've heard from corporate South Africa, all these big checks that they promised in Sandton to write, and yet here we are, and none of it has been forthcoming. What is holding them back? Are they still not happy with the message that they're seeing out of government? Are they still not happy? I suppose not anybody's happy to see a ruling party at each other's throats because they're not focused on the job at hand. Why are they holding back?
So they're holding back because the environment currently is not conducive for investment. No private enterprise is going to invest capital without the prospect of earning a rate of return on that investment. You know, private enterprise is not in the business of handing out charity. Ultimately, they need to earn a rate of return on their investments. And in the current environment, with joblessness at 30%, you know, with consumer and business confidence at very low levels, and with no kind of concrete plan as to, you know, how we're going to turn around some of the critical institutions in South Africa, Eskom being one of them. It's all well and good that we're throwing the checkbook at Eskom and saying 100 billion rand over the next 3 years.
Or that we've got inquiries looking at what's happened at other SOEs and government departments as well.
Yeah, exactly. So there's inquiry after inquiry to find out how funds were misappropriated. I mean, let's not forget that the budget deficits of South Africa, and this is a shocking statistic, if municipalities' irregular and wasteful expenditure is essentially half of the budget deficits of South Africa. So at a budget deficit of what's projected to be 6% of GDP, that number could be 3% of GDP had we just had no fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Now, it's unrealistic to expect that number to be zero, but the message is that 120 billion rand from municipalities every year is frittered away in wasteful and fruitless expenditure.
That's obscene.
Yeah, and if we consider that of the budget, around 170 billion rand actually goes towards capital investments every year from South Africa's budget, that number could go up by 70% had municipalities just not been wasting money. So businesses are not going to invest money in this uncertain political environment, in this environment where there's no direction for key state-owned enterprises. Eskom supplies 95% of our electricity. If you're not going to have the stable electricity supply, you ain't going to get any investment into your country.
They've got the country at the short and curlies, don't they?
Absolutely right. And the bottom line, as I mentioned at the start, you can announce a 100 billion rand bailout package, but the bottom line is that if there is no concrete plan to turn around the 21 billion rand loss that they reported earlier this week, or the fact that their salary bill has quadrupled over the course of the last decade, or the fact that their assets have gone up by 20-fold without generating any more electricity. These are very real concerns. So government needs to tackle these in a swift manner. And, announcing new CEOs and having more commissions and more investment summits is not dealing with what the critical issues are.
And not doing all-important future planning, because when companies are deciding to invest, it's not just for right now, it's for the foreseeable future as well. Now, you said earlier, look, government's not completely to blame, but by the sounds of it also, the ball is very much in their court. A lack of policy certainty and just a lack of direction.
Yeah, look, I mean, so there's, it's push and pull, right? I mean, ultimately, each party is going to be blaming each other. Let's not forget, the corporate sector has not covered itself in a whole lot of glory over the course of the last decade. One, with the scandals that have come out, so, it almost seems like who's actually going to lead this fight against corruption? We talk about wasteful and irregular expenditure at the municipalities being 50% of the budget deficit. There's no corrupted without a corrupter. Let's not forget that, and the private sector is very much at the behest of that. So that's the first point to note. And the second point is that, if the capital allocation and the investment decisions you are making offshore were successful in creating value for shareholders, then you have a leg to stand on to say, I'm not investing in SA because I'm not going to earn you a rate of return.
And I'm going to do better elsewhere.
If you're not earning me a rate of return by investing offshore in any event, you've got a very flimsy leg that you're standing on. So, it's not about, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is that the time for finger pointing and blaming is over. We have reached crisis levels. Government creates an environment that's conducive to investment. Corporate South Africa starts investing, and let's create those jobs.
Well, let's just pause there for a second. I want to go now. I've joined in the studio by investment strategist Nadir Token. But let's take you now live to our reporter, Samkele Maseko, who has been covering the handing over of this NEDLAC report to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's check in with him now. Samkele, what is the latest that you can tell us from there?
At this point in time, the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, David Mabuza, and the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, along with the Labour Minister, that would be Thula Singlisi, they have arrived along Labour federations and alongside Business Unity South Africa. We did see the acting CEO, Cas Cavadia, earlier on, and we did speak to him, but at this point in time, they are awaiting for the arrival of the President of the Republic of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, to receive an update on the implementation of the resolutions taken at the 2018 Jobs Summit. But let's just listen to the spokesperson of President Cyril Ramaphosa, Mrs. Khusala Diko, further speaking on how it would be detrimental for South Africa to approach the IMF for a bailout, and also saying that those discussions are not yet underway.
That is not a matter that has been put on the table or discussed at this point. What the President wants us to do is to ensure that we continue to tighten our belts, particularly as government, to ensure that our state-owned enterprises are returned to stability, proper governance, proper financial management, and indeed we begin to unlock the potential of our people, our small businesses. So as it relates to conversations on the IMF, those are not yet on the table.
Now, Samkele, you've been speaking to some rather important stakeholders there, one of them being Labour. What did Becky and Charlie have to say about what they're expecting to transpire today?
Becky Charlie, the General Secretary of COSATU, is basically saying that they want to see and want to hear if what are the bottlenecks that have been preventing the private sector into investing into the South African economy, and why are jobs being shred like there's no tomorrow. As you can see that there's a jobs bloodbath currently taking place in the country. Becky Charlie also saying that they as Labour are willing to concede on certain or specific or certain issues that they have demanded from government that must be implemented, and there are certain demands with the private sector. They are willing to ease those for the economy to pick up, but they are also saying that South Africa cannot continuously be throwing money into the Eskom hole with no proper dividends, and with the power utility not fixing its balance sheet and not fixing its structural issues that are contributing to the power utility basically being a burden onto the South African fiscus and to the economy. So they are saying they want solutions and not issues that are there for the interim, but they want long-standing solutions for the power utility and for the economy of South Africa to grow.
Now, according to the schedule of events today, the President is set to receive this report, this very important report, but in a week where South Africans are desperately seeking answers to an increasingly failing economy with the worst jobs numbers in more than a decade, are we expected to hear from the President today?
At this point in time, I don't think South Africans will be hearing a word from the President of the Republic of South Africa. We tried to even ask the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, a question or two. He was very stunned and wasn't willing to answer any of the questions, basically coming back through a phone call and saying he was a bit ambushed by us, the ANCA. Even the Deputy President, David Mabuza, when he came in, we tried to throw in a question to the Deputy President. He just simply greeted and went inside the meeting, basically not willing to say a word at this point in time. We did try through the communications of President Cyril Ramaphosa's office to check if he would be saying a word or two. They are simply refusing, saying the President is just here to receive a report, have his inputs, make his inputs, and then afterwards the economic cluster ministers will then have a press briefing at about 4:30 this afternoon on the update on what this particular report back of the implementation of the resolutions of the Jobs Summit are and what are the bottlenecks that are being said to the ministers, and they will provide a feedback to South Africans, but we're not anticipating or expecting the President of the Republic of South Africa to say anything. But of course, as ENCA, we know that we will try to pose those questions to the President of the Republic of South Africa.
I have no doubt you will. Thank you so much. ENCA Samkele Maseko coming to us live there from Rosebank, where the National Economic Development and Labour Council expected to hand over their progress report on the Presidential Job Summit in 2018 to the President. In the studio, I've got investment strategist Nadir Token with me. You heard what our reporter had to say there. I was saying earlier, the National Economic Development and Labour Council, NEDLAC, when was the last time that you heard them in the news making any serious pronouncements that could come in and help revive this failing economy?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and there seems to be too many summits and too many councils, and the bottom line is that we just got to get on with the work at hand and actually start unlocking South Africa's potential and start creating some employment. I think I was actually mentioning in another interview that poverty is not what results in uprising. It's inequality that results in uprising. The anger that's generated through inequality that results in uprising
and frustration.
And frustration. And South Africa is rapidly approaching that point in time. And as I mentioned at the start of the interview, you know, the time for finger pointing and blaming and political games is over now. We are out of road. You know, our state-owned entities are in a shocking state and are not going to be in a position to be reinvesting back into the economy for a long period of time. So, you know, we need to create a conducive environment for business to be able to do that. Having said that, you know, not all hope is lost. If you look at things like PepsiCo, who recently came in and bought Pioneer Foods, you know, and the statement that they issued on South Africa was exceptionally bullish, you know, reiterating that their 24 billion rand investment in South Africa, albeit, you know, a drop in the bucket with regards to PepsiCo overall, but the fact that they're investing 24 billion rand in their statement indicating that, you know, this is a show of confidence in the South African economy and the fact that they are long-term investor within the South African economy. So we need to unlock more of that growth. And as I mentioned to you, it's the time for pointing fingers and worrying about who said what. We are far beyond that. We are out of road now, and we just need to create a conducive environment for confidence, and businesses then need to invest and start creating jobs.
Is creating an environment that is fast-paced to turn around decisions made at policy level, as well as taking forward promises that are made at summits. Yeah. Today we're waiting for a report on the presidential job summit to be handed over to the president. Yeah. A job summit that happened in 2018. Yeah. We are halfway through 2019. Isn't that in itself an indictment and an example of why we are struggling to get these wheels turning?
Yeah, well, exactly, you know, and the reason that these things happen is because there's too many vested interests and there's too many politics in the background, and, you know, it seems like the ruling party, you know, are fighting obviously a lot of internal battles, and it's distracting their attention, but at the same time, you know, there's a lot of vested interest from the private sector as well, which is exactly why I'm saying the only way we speed this process up is for everybody to drop the vested interests, for the ruling party or the key members of the ruling party to be able to focus on the job at hand and doing their job, and the vested interest within the political circles disappearing as well, and everybody just getting on and having this one same common goal. Because if we do not get onto the same page, and if we do not have that one common goal, you know, we mentioned you heard the presidential spokesperson saying that an IMF bailout is not discussions that are being had at the moment. We are going to be rapidly approaching that territory if we just don't put aside the politics and the vested interests and get on with what needs to be done.
We're going to leave it there. Perfect note to do so. And investment strategist Nadir Token, thank you so much. And indeed, it seems we're at a time where South Africans need all of the important people in those important boardrooms, both political and business, to put their differences aside and put the needs of the country first.